Hi, I'm Erin Guyton. I am IEB financial coach, and I help companies in IEB toward greater financial efficiency. I've worked with about 100 inspection companies across the nation.
And Erin's nickname is Numbers.
It is
So
numbers.
if you don't know that, you'll find out why. My name is Chris Enright. I am a lead coach with IEB, PEB, and instructor at RSDMM. So let's dive into our topic today is KPIs related to growth. And what are the things we're looking at? Why are they important? And how it affects our business.
Yeah.
So let's dive in, and Erin, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions here, and that I think will bring tons of value. We're here to talk about KPIs related to growth, but let's start at the basics. What is a KPI?
Right. Key performance indicator.
Yeah. So expanding the mindset of KPIs is super important, because as you move forward in your business, there are key indicators for success that will take you to the next level. Once you start figuring out what those key indicators are, then you can start pushing the lever in specific ways to make sure that your company is on the right track. If you don't have good KPIs, it's really difficult to say, okay, if I do X, it affects Y, and Y is where I want to go. You don't have the background to do it. You don't have enough information if you're not looking at the proper KPIs.
Yep. And I like to say that your business speaks to you through a language, and that language is numbers. And it's not just your P&L. It's any number of different numbers that are speaking to you, that are telling you how your business is performing. We break them down into lead measures and lag measures. And when you and I talked on the phone about collaborating on this call, we both instantly went to our corner, because I said lag measures are where I love being. And you said lead measures are where I live. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so first let's define lead and lag,
Yeah.
right? Because this concept comes from a book called 4 Disciplines of Execution, 40X. You'll hear a lot of people refer to it as 40X. And if you haven't read it, it's a great read, and it's a systematic approach to business. And when they're talking about different things that they measure, there's 2 ways to do that. You can look forward or back. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking back, you're looking at historical data. So let's have a couple of examples. Your P&L. You produce a P&L in February for January, and you're now looking in the rearview mirror to what you did. You can't change those numbers. That is a snapshot in time. It's your business communicating to you from that snapshot in time, and you can make decisions based on what's already happened, but you can't affect the outcome. Lead measures, on the other hand, are the action that you take that moves the needle. For instance, I know that if I make X amount of calls, right, I'm going to get X amount of people on the phone. And if the goal is to get X amount of people on the phone, then the lead measure is how many calls I make, right? That's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but right up front, I make the calls, people will pick up eventually, right? The more calls I make, the more people will pick up statistically, right? So we know that lead measure affects that lag measure. If I look in the rearview mirror, I can say, okay, well, we talked to 30 people and we had to make 80 calls to get there, right? So that's a simple version of a lag measure. And when we focus on our business, it's so easy to do it looking at the bank. And the bank is also a lag measure. And when we're a small business, right, that's really the lifeblood of everything is, do I have money? What this proposes in a lead measure is, how do I affect my money tomorrow? How do I look ahead and say, here's the lever I push to get this? And now you can start being predictive with your activity. And your activity is your time. And your time is the most valuable resources you have. So if you can direct your activity to go towards the specific result that you're looking for, that's how you affect lag measures, is by inputting on the lead.
Yeah. relative to growth, how do you set those lead measures? How do you set number of phone calls? Where do you even begin?
Yeah, so so growth. The cool thing about growth is that when you're entering the space of growth, typically you have people who want to engage with people. So setting benchmarks for how many people they engage, if you have the right person in place, is going to be a motivator in and of itself. So when we look at growth, we're looking at, okay, how many calls affects everything, or how many visits, or whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
We the best way to get somebody to be onboarded to whatever that goal is to have them create it themselves.
Yeah.
And certainly with some guidance, right? Like they can say, oh, I'm going to make 10 calls in a week, right? Okay, well, I'm going to challenge that, right? And I'm not going to create the goal for them, but if I'm leading them, I'm going to really challenge them to get the most out of them. So if somebody creates their own goal, they have way more buy-in. So that's how we do it. And when we're approaching growth, like we're like, okay, set your goal. And we know some pretty common statistics about the number of phone calls that go out, the number of people who will answer based on that, like percentage of people that answer. There's some pretty good guidelines there, which we can get into, but that's kind of how we target our goals. And we have them make it, and then we hold them accountable to the goals that they set.
Now, what about some other lead measures and goals? So you mentioned phone calls.
Yeah.
Do you break those down by type of phone calls? And also you said visits, or do you break that down by types of visits?
And it really depends on what you're looking to achieve. So let's take the phone calls, for example, right? We use a 5x5 process, which we get into in some of the other growth videos and stuff. But we make sure that there's a certain number of calls outgoing, and the result of those calls is the meeting. We are looking for our reps to meet with the agent. So when the calls go out, we know, okay, we are looking for X amount of meetings today, X amount of meetings next week. And we just filter it through, hey, I know that this many phone calls is going to yield in this many answers. And typically we can get a certain percentage of that to go on a meeting with us, and we can discuss their business with them.
Now, would you consider the number of meetings scheduled a lag measure then?
I would say, so it depends on when you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Right. That's a relative thing, because if I'm setting it and I'm looking, I know that this number of meetings will result in this number of inspections, right? So I can look at it on the front end and be like, okay, we're pushing this lead measure is you meet with X amount of people and we will get X amount of people onboarded. And over time, that will work out to be, statistically accurate, right? We'll see a trend. And so that way you can predict, look, if I make, so this is how a KPI helps you on a lead measure, right? You can start to go, hey, I've been doing this for a year. Let's look at this data. And now I can say, hey, I know if my growth people make this many calls, I can literally expect X amount of inspections within an acceptable margin of error, because you've done it for a year and you've seen how it resulted.
Mm-hmm.
That's how KPIs can drive your business, because it drives decision making.
Yeah. And all of the things that you just mentioned tie into the lag measures that I look at. And it's funny because I'm always looking at lag measures and I never see all of that got to that point. But one of the very first couple of things I look at when I'm working with somebody is the number of new agents they're bringing in every week, and how is that trending over time. So that right there, like, directly ties to all of those lead measures of making phone calls and getting out there and meeting people. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about a lead measure on retention, because one of the things I look at is the number of, and I'm going to talk in a second about the number of inspections per agent on average, which is kind of a measure of how well you're retaining people. What would be a retention lead measure?
So I think a retention lead measure is pretty simple, but not easy, right? Because there's a lot of time that goes into retention. But we know retention is crucial because it costs way more to acquire a new agent than it does to retain one you already have. So we focus pretty heavy on retention, and some of the ways that you can really affect retention on the lead measure is asking good questions. But you can't ask good questions unless you're doing great follow-up. So follow-up meetings are important, follow-up calls, texts, just touch points to make sure, because most people, and we talk about lag measures here, and this ties in, most people avoid conflict. Most people won't tell you why they left your company. Most people will not tell you why they won't use you anymore. But if you open a door for them, they'll walk through it. And that door opening is the lead measure, right? So going up to somebody and being like, hey, how was our service? And not being scared of the answer. That's the key, right?
Yeah.
That's a big lead measure, right? In retention, is following up. So then let's go back another step. Before you even do that, one of the lead measures that you have to look at is, what is your retention look like? To your point, I need the lag measure, the data, to drive what my leads are in the future. Right? This is how this circle goes with lead and lags, right? I can look at the lags and say, well, the lead that I had before did or did not work, and it affected, I pushed the gas pedal down harder, or I changed directions, right?
Yeah. The one thing that is a lag measure that's going to let you know how you're doing is referral reasons. Because if you don't know how your business is coming in, you don't know which lead measures you're doing have the most impact. And not just the referral reason, how did the home buyer find you, but how did the agent find you?
Yeah.
And we in the inspection industry have a very unique set of circumstances where at some point you get a touch point with that agent. Either the client care person books the phone call, gets to ask them how they heard about your company, or the growth person follows up to say, how did we do? And then that person can ask. And if you still don't get it, then the inspector will be with the agent on the inspection, and they can ask, how did you hear about us? So referral reasons for the agent, but for the home buyer are two of my other favorite lags, in addition to all the agent metrics. You mentioned, how are we doing relative to our market? And that's another one I'd love to talk about, because
let's dig into lag measures.
When times are great, we're up, we're succeeding, we're doing so well. And when things slow down, it's like, oh, the market is terrible.
Yeah.
And there's two ways to know that. That's market share number, and what is your market doing number.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's important to compare those two, right? So let's dig deeper into lag measures, because I think we talked enough about leads.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at lag measures, I know you love that. Why do you like them so much?
Because they trend. That's why I love them, because they trend. They tell you something. For example, I met with a client yesterday, and we were looking at their market share, and their market share was going up. And they're like, how are we going up when our numbers are down? And I said, because your market is shrinking, and people are getting out of business, and you are getting more of the work that's left. And they said, is this good? And I said, when the market changes, because real estate is cyclical and it always changes, imagine what you're going to do with your new bigger market share. That's why I love these numbers. That's why I love market share, which is just simply the number of inspections you do as a percent of the number of houses that either went pending or sold. We'll put some resources in with this call to talk about how to calculate it. And the big question is, well, what's a good market share? And my answer is always, it depends. If you're in Hawaii and you're on an island and there's one other person doing inspections, you might have 40% market share, 50, If you are in Houston, how big's Houston, Chris? How many transactions do you have a year? Like 100?
So in 2022, I think they're doing like about 100,000 transactions, somewhere around that.
Yeah. Wouldn't you like to have 40% market share?
That would be pretty cool, but also be super scary.
Yeah.
Right? That's a tall tree to topple, man.
Yeah. Other lag measures I like to look at beyond the ones we talked about for agents and market.
Yeah, you talked about referral reasons.
Yep.
Let's dig into some of that.
Yeah, some of the other things, market growth. We talked about that. Is your market growing or shrinking? But really, there's some other basics. Number of phone calls that come in. It's not just, are my sales up? You kind of want to know, why my sales are up. And all these things are related. Is the phone ringing more? Yes. Great. By how much? Phone's ringing more by 10%. How are the agents finding us? Oh, they received a phone call from somebody, or they were referred by another agent in the same office. Okay, great. That tells us something. If the number one reason is I was referred by another agent at my same office, I had to get on the phone and call your existing top agents and say, hey, who can we meet? Who can you introduce us to? And then you have just the number of like digital, all your digital metrics. And I am not a digital metrics expert, but digital people who work for you love to give you metrics, number of times clicks, people, number of reviews. Are your number of reviews increasing? People who are giving you positive comments, likes on social, clicks that are converting. There really almost is no limit to the amount of things that you can count.
Measure, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it really does never end. And you can get lost in it if you're not purposeful about it, right? Because you could start digging into numbers that don't mean anything to what you're trying to achieve. It's just a great rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. One other thing we were asked to talk about today was ROI.
Yeah. How do you prefer looking at ROI?
I prefer looking at it on almost more of a macro, bigger scale as what was the total growth budget? What did I spend versus how much work came in from that spend? For example,
So percent to revenue.
Yeah. For example, let's just say digital. That's a classic one. And it's also an expensive one. And you and I have also talked before about acquisition activities are more expensive than retention activities.
For sure.
Yeah. But in the digital world, they like to see a 5-to-1 return. In other words, if you spent $1,000 on a digital something, they want you to sell $5,000, but that's not your profit. So, you have to look at what's your profit on that $5,000, and you might be break even at a 5-to-1 return on digital. But can you be really good at tracking your lag measures to see how many more subsequent inspections you got? Did you pick up a top producing agent? Did you find a way to get more money from that? So I tend to kind of look at the cost of the marketing activity versus how much work came in from that. So same thing with like presentations, right? Okay, I paid my growth person, I bought lunch, I did this. How much work did I get from this presentation? What was my profit on that? That's how I do it. How do you like to do it?
I mean, very similarly, right? And it depends on the activity. There's so many things that we can measure ROI in that we can get lost in it because there's so much activity in our businesses. Even if it's a small business, right? From all the way up to a big business. If you start to measure any kind of ROIs up front, measuring them as you grow is going to be easier because you're already used to it. And I think that's more important that you just focus on getting clean numbers so you can start to understand what is your business really telling you. And then there's a kind of falsehood of ROI is it's not so black and white. We don't just look at ROI and say, okay, we broke even or we lost here. And that's a bad thing necessarily, because we could be looking like to what you said earlier. We could be looking at future gains. Maybe we broke even, but we nailed a big agent. We got we're right there on their list now. And in future, that's going to return more than we put in. But on the short term, the ROI might not be there. So it really, you gotta be looking at the long-term effects before you measure ROI as a whole, right? Sometimes it's on a rolling average. Okay, what does it look like on a rolling 12 months, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily that calendar year. So there's different ways you could look at ROI, and it could really affect your outcome differently. It could affect your decision making differently.
Yeah. I like to use the example of ROI. And you made a great point about knowing your numbers, because if you don't know your numbers, if you don't know your financials, if you don't know your existing profit margin, you should find that out pronto, because let's just say your average fee is $500 and your profit margin's 20%. You're making $100 on every inspection. So if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to sponsor this booklet for me and it's $1,500, there's a tendency to think like, oh, I just need to do about like 3 inspections, and but you need to do like 15 inspections, right? But if you're looking at it like, hey, that's our top agent, and they give us like 13 inspections a year, but we really want to retain them, you could put that ROI in I'm using this toward my retention budget, right? Or it could be that you do something like that for an agent who's not using you, but that they have the potential to give you 20 or 30 inspections in a year. So I like to think about the why behind the ROI, because you do have to do some branding stuff. There's really no ROI in that, but you can't not have a digital presence at all. It's like being in the phone book back in the old days. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, those some ROIs are real tricky to nail down, and some are conjecture.
Yeah,
like we have some that's straight up conjecture, because I can't get to causation, right? We can get to correlation, we can't get to causation all.
Right.
But sometimes if we trend it long enough, then it becomes causation, right? Like we're like, okay, well, we keep inputting here and we keep getting this out of it, so right. But yeah, that's how tricky ROI can be.
Yeah.
So so I think that wraps it up for this topic, and I really appreciate you being here, and for whoever's watching, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next video. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks everybody. Have a great day.